now to bring us on to our final session, really to say, how can we thrive? I'm delighted to invite our last two speakers of the day, the inimitable and highly energetic and inspiring Ann Francke, who is head of the Chartered Institute of Management. If you don't know about it, I'm sure we'll hear more and ways of engaging with the Institute. And also Kai Peters, Professor Kai Peters, who is the provost I'm going to get that wrong, isn't it? Yes, at Coventry University for Business and Law and also International Development, and is an author and expert on leadership as well. So delighted to welcome you both to the stage to really help us understand how we can thrive in this time ahead, hearing everything what we've already heard this afternoon. So Ann and Kai, welcome.
So Ann has a good proper photo. That's a selfie of myself on my phone yesterday. And we obviously have our handles for Twitter. Who's on Mastodon? No one's on Mastodon yet? No? You will be soon. Our last session is the looking ahead session. I'd just like to provide you a little bit of context from my perspective, and then we'll carry on. Some years ago, I got invited to one of those all-party parliamentary committee thingies. And this one was about management in the UK. And I was there together with Linda Grattan, who some of you may know from London Business School, as well as Julian Birkinshaw. I was running Ashridge at the time. And what we could come up with was business schools were too expensive for a lot of management education, for lower levels of management, and they could invest in online, which no one in the government wanted to. And we concluded that leadership was about sense-making on the one hand, and change management on the other. And I think that's kind of the theme. So I'm originally a historian, so if I can just kind of throw a spanner into the works and give you not the of-the-minute perspective, but the 200 years looking backwards and then looking forwards perspective. I mean, we've really screwed it up in the past 200 years, haven't we now? The Industrial Revolution started, depending on who you ask, between 1780 and 1820. That's about 200 years. In that time, we've grown the population from 500 million to 8 billion. We're into climate change. Climate changers, I know a lot of them, always talk about those 2 degrees. 2 degrees is nice, isn't it? I mean, it's quite pleasant now, 2 degrees warmer. They don't tell you what's going to happen. We're going to have, within a short period of time, 3 billion refugees in parts of the world that are uninhabitable. And Suella Braverman's going to have to sink a lot of little boats as they all want to come here. My own view on this is global warming causes desertification in large parts of the Sahara. That means there's a resource constraint. You can't grow anything. People start squabbling. It turns into a war, which turns into refugees. The refugees want to go somewhere where it's cooler. So there's something that I think we need to wrap our heads around mitigation isn't going to do it anymore. We have to think about adaptation. And for our organizations, that adaptation is starting now. It's not something we can kick down the road for 50 years. It's something that we need to really think about now if we want to be around in 50 or 100 years. Is the business that we're in sustainable in the sense of, does it make sense, you know? If we're selling sun umbrellas, that's probably pretty good. If we're trying to do ski hills in Switzerland, there's no snow anymore. So how do we deal with these kinds of questions in and around leadership, not being depressing, but being kind of realistic? I mean, there's a counterbalance to this, and I will shut up soon. If you look at Steven Pinker or Max Roser and the Our World in Data Institute at Oxford University, they're of course saying over the past 100 years, much lower child mortality, much higher women's lifetimes, smaller families, greater wealth, many, many good things. So I'm not saying everything is going to hell in a handcart, but I'm saying it's really complex what we're going to be facing with the kind of trade-offs. And one of the joys of being in academia is you're allowed to have a foul mouth. And business people tend to be very polite, you know? We were talking earlier about, you know, the dilemmas. What do you do if you're Disney in Florida and believe in LGBT plus rights? And DeSantis doesn't, and the state winds you up, right? You're stuck. There's nothing you can do. So management and leadership for me is how to balance these types of questions and try and find a way through them. If the answer was 100% black or 100% white, we wouldn't be talking about it. So you're doing a kind of a Brexit thing, 49-51, 48-52. You're going to piss off half the world no matter what you do. And that is the reality of what management seems to me to be like. And certainly what I talked about doing executive education for 15 years before I joined Coventry. And I'd like to pass over to Anne just for a perspective on, you also, we're kind of in a similar space, aren't we, about good management, developing managers, recognizing management qualities. And I'd also like your opinion on how apprenticeships are going, because I have some views on that, and I'll pass it over to you for a bit.
Okay. Well, firstly, I would say, listening to the previous discussion, there's a lot that came up that I do agree with. I like to say that actually what happened in the pandemic is the employees went to the top of the stakeholder wheel, which is an unusual position for them to be in, because let's face it, everybody's been saying in their annual reports for years, our best asset is our people, and not meaning it. But suddenly, the employees really mattered. And that's not just the frontline employees, although they, of course, mattered, but it was actually the middle and you know, the managers as well as the frontline employees. And what that then meant is that suddenly how you led and managed really mattered a lot more. And I think that created a bit of a movement about caring more about how people lead. And we've talked about Elon Musk. I am absolutely convinced that pre-pandemic, he would have swooped in, he would have said, I'm hardcore and hard ass, and everybody would have gone, oh, okay. Now, post-pandemic, where employee voice and how you lead and manage really matters much more, they're not putting up with it, right? And oh, by the way, the advertisers then aren't putting up with it. So I actually think, to your point, that the uncertainty that we find ourselves in has made management and leadership and how you lead and manage more important than ever. And the CEOs that don't get that and, you know, continue to puff on their cigars and say, don't talk to my employees, or, you know, everybody back in the office 5 days a week, are going to lose out. Because people are much more willing to vote with their feet at every level, managers and leaders. And we know that from our research. It's particularly true for younger people, but increasingly it's true, and actually it's very true for what we call marginalized groups, the ones that were not in the majority whilst it was being screwed up the last 200 years. You know, women, minorities, disabled people, people from poor backgrounds.
Peripheral groups, the ones, where are you really from, those ones.
Yeah, and for those people as well, you know, the values and how you lead and manage matters more than ever before, and people are much, much more willing to call CEOs and senior managers out on it. And the last thing I would say is, people know. So if you are, because obviously you're all communication professionals, but we just did a major piece of research on inclusivity, all forms. 75 to 85% of those we surveyed said, of course, our company is inclusive when it comes to gender, race, disability, age, LGBTQ+. But then we said, okay, so could you name one concrete thing that your company is doing about this, that you're aware of and involved in? And suddenly, you know, the 85% dropped to 25%, in one case 5%. We call that the say-do gap. And people are much more aware, your customers, your employees, you know, your suppliers, other people that give you revenue like advertisers, they're much, much more aware of your say-do gap than they were previously. And they will call you out on it. And you know, that is happening more and more. We're seeing it more and more in social media, in the press. And again, it's another manifestation of actually your values matter more now, and how you lead and manage matters more now.
Do you think that the present situation where people don't want to go back into the office, don't want to be told what to do, is a blip, or do you think it's here to stay?
So it's interesting. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I and most of them think it's here to stay, because the genie's out of the bottle. right? People discovered, well, of course we can be productive. You know, of course we can fill in the blank, publish a national newspaper, host a board meeting, run a bank remotely. And it made people able to fit their work around their lives. And 82% of our managers and leaders said, of course we want to continue in a hybrid fashion. But the word is hybrid. And you know, to your point, it's never really black or white. It's gray, right? And so, of course, people want to go back into the office. We're social human beings, but they don't want to go back into the office and sit on Zoom calls. And again, that's about management. You have to think as a manager, why am I bringing my people back into the office? Is it for something meaningful? You know, who am I bringing back into the office? The worst scenario you have is all the senior guys on the exec floor, and then, you know, all the people in the middle and the bottom are actually not coming back. And that's just reinforcing that divide. And you know, that's a real watch out, actually.
Yeah, must happen to many of us in the room. I live in West Hampstead and work up in Coventry, so it's 2 hours 15 each way. And when I get all that way to sit on a Teams call with someone who's not there, it just seems
you get annoyed. You say, why
am
am I doing this, right? And that's what people realized. You know, and so they know it works, and they know it's better for them. And so, you know, that's why you keep reading, you know, some CEO is now called back in the office 5 days a week, and everybody's going, yeah.
No. Yeah, there was a thing in HR Grapevine yesterday about people just ignoring it.
Exactly.
We had a 3-line whip. None of us do it.
No.
Imagine telling academics at a university to turn up every day. You're going to lose, right?
Well, yeah, and it isn't just academics, although obviously an obstreperous bunch, right? but it's, you know, it's people at Microsoft. It's people, you know, in banks. It's people in the civil service, right? It's quite widespread.
Yeah, the only reason people are going in is because it's cold at home. Heating is
Heating
expensive.
yes, that's
so you
true.
might as well turn up at the office and warm up. I mentioned also developing leaders, and you've been working on it at the CMI, from both the CMI leader programs, as well as keeping an eye on the troops over the years, and also apprenticeships. Have you seen changes in how leadership is developed? Have you tried to do different things? I know you had the framework and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, we have. We've just updated that framework. It's our management professional standards, so we create standards and then we assess against them. And in the center of the framework now, we've actually put, you know, being an ethical, inclusive leader, because we know, and this is actually, again, quite critical, and I don't think that we can emphasize this enough. Having diverse viewpoints and bringing in diverse pools of talent into your workforce at every level does a number of things. It does deliver better innovation, better decision making, better results. It enables you, you know, if you think about those concerns that Sandra was talking about, the ability to attract and retain talent, it is essential for doing that. And it is essential for actually growth, which is what we're really trying to get in the UK context in particular. So it is everybody's job, every manager and leader's job, to create an inclusive environment and to close that say-do gap. And it isn't the ED&I guy or gal's job. It's an essential part of line management, and that's a huge change. And by the way, so is sustainability, right? So unless we can hardwire these things into what it means to be a modern manager and leader, and we're all taking everyday practical steps to make sure that we're actually doing it, we will not be anywhere near as successful or prosperous, and we won't grow as much.
Yeah, so in the business school landscape, we have to report against the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN, and obviously some clean water doesn't have a whole lot to do with the business school, but a lot of them do, but we looked at them. Who's read through the UN's SDGs? Good, yeah. Have you gone down into not only the 17, but then the whatever they are, and then the 7 million ones where they actually tell you what it all is? Quite complex.
Well, it is, but somebody said earlier, and you know, hiding behind ESG. And I do think, you know, there is a lot of that still going on. And people are, you know, some of it's legitimate because they don't really know. But there's much more understanding and rallying crying going on the E and the G than there is on the S. And that's, so if you look at, for example, what progress have we really made on becoming a more diverse and inclusive society? Let's just take the leaders and managers in the UK.
Yeah.
This piece of work we did showed, you know, we're still missing, if you match labor force participation with who's managing and leading the place, you know, we're still missing close to 2 million managers, you know, 500,000 women, 420 from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, 270 disabled, 100,000 ethnically diverse, et cetera, et cetera. So there's not diversity anywhere near enough in the management and leadership population and in the population taking decisions.
Yeah.
And that's still an issue.
Yeah, that's why I'm at Coventry, to try and kind of plug that gap, because I think it only works. And what I definitely learned at Ashridge is it's a long-term project.
It is a long-term project.
You know, somebody earlier on said lots of, you were saying about how books, you know, by the time kids are 2 or 3, if you look at the neuroscience of it all, if they're from households with no books, they're toast for the rest of their lives, practically. So we need to start with the early start, sure start kind of programs. Then they can get to Coventry when they're 17. Then they can join the CMI, and then they can be put on a board where they're 40. If they're 39 and poor and you put them on the board, they're going to just have real trouble with it. And so this is always terrible for a middle-aged white guy, not from here, to say. But we saw in the kind of Emiratization, Saudification, South Africa, and I shudder to say the same for groups that are underrepresented. You need to accelerate their experience somehow to be able to get them to understand the context that they have to think about things in. That requires all our efforts to make sure it's just simply possible. Otherwise, you're just guaranteeing someone will fail. You send some poor kid to Oxford without any support. They're not going to do very well.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned apprenticeships. It is something that we do. Well, again, it's part of we developed the IP with employers for the management and leadership apprenticeship standard. We don't deliver it. Coventry does. But what's really interesting, we've just done a major piece of work about apprenticeships, so management apprenticeships. Yeah. Who's doing them? Well, you know what's really interesting? 71% of the management apprentices had parents that did not go to university. And if you look at the socioeconomic background of these apprentices, 39% are from poor socioeconomic backgrounds. Only 27% of typical university students are from poor socioeconomic backgrounds. So it is having a positive impact on social mobility. And it's also having a positive impact on progression, because your point is, and this is also so important for companies, I hear this all the time, oh, we've fixed our woman problem, fill in the blank, because half our intake is women. Well, you know, I guarantee you, 3 years from now, you know, as they're moving up, they'll be gone. Mm-hmm. And so unless you have progression, which is your point, for these very diverse groups, and you think very practically about who am I promoting, you know, and why, and is that, you know, am I really inclusive in that process, and am I making it on the basis of performance and outcome, not presence, for example, or, you know, flattery. That becomes so important.
Totally. What I've seen with the apprenticeships is it's changed the market, the educational landscape quite a lot, more at the exec ed end, actually, than at the undergrad. The undergrad nurses are now all doing apprenticeships because the nurse subsidy went away. So, and that's how that works. But the corporations are not spending on exec ed anymore because they figure they want to get their tax back. So they're doing the apprenticeships in many cases. Too many level 7. Level 7 is master's degrees, business apprenticeships for all and sundry to spend money as quickly as possible. And the problem with them, we were talking earlier in the day about regulation and some of the regulators. Who do you think regulates apprenticeships now? It's Ofsted. It's insane. Ofsted does kindergartens. So we're being inspected for our ability to teach British values, whatever those might be. We're being inspected on whether we are safeguarding them. A lot of our students at level 7 are head teachers They're in their mid-40s. We're supposed to make sure we don't molest them, you know, and you're not supposed to molest the under 18s or vulnerable adults. But we got to put this whole show on about how we have an infrastructure in place at a university with 40,000 students for a couple of thousand apprenticeship students who are in their 40s about these bonkers things. And the way Ofsted works is they give you a call on a Thursday and they say, we're coming with a team of 12 on Monday for all of next week. So we're counting down, that we know we're going to get inspected soon. We're counting down every Thursday we survive without a phone call as a step closer to heaven, or in my case, retirement, you know? So we think we're good for this year because we have no more students if they give us a call today for like next week. They're all on break already, so this is good.
Okay. Well, what is true is, because I was just reading this today, actually, if you are a university and you are delivering a degree apprenticeship, because they have proven popular with undergrads as well as existing employees. And by the way, there is nothing wrong with upskilling your existing employees. If we're going to solve the talent problem, we do need to do that. And if we're going to get better management, we do need to do that. But the universities that deliver degree apprenticeships are far more likely to get rated the top 2 ratings from Ofsted than those that don't. So, you know, keep delivering the apprenticeships, you'll be fine.
If you get something evil, like needs improvement, they prevent you from recruiting any new ones, so you got to teach out. So we're all keeping an eye on each other on who gets like a black mark to then go hoover up all of theirs. So it's all a bit nuts, but it is. So in some ways, if it were up to me and I were running a company that wanted to develop the pipeline, I would take more responsibility. I probably wouldn't do the state-funded apprenticeships because of all the hoops and hurdles that are involved. I would really think about what is needed. I would try and do something where people are working and studying at the same time so that the kids make some money and not exploit them. And I do think that we're going to have to grow our own pipelines. They're not going to fall from heaven. We're not allowed to bring them in from the EU anymore, are we? No. We're not allowed to bring them in from anywhere anymore.
Well, we need a long-term skills policy that grows talent in this country, right? And yes, we should plug the short-term gaps. You know, I'm very on board with employers wanting to plug short-term skills gaps through immigration, whether that's in agriculture, whether it's in hospitality, whether it's, you know, because we can't grow our own that quickly. But if I go back to this employee stakeholder thing, you know, we have a lot of people who have left the workforce, older people, for example. And what would be great is to attract a lot of them back in. Now, what works to attract older people back into the workplace? Well, things like flexibility. And it actually doesn't only, I'm not only talking about knowledge work, which, you know, you can work from home, I can work from home, many of you can work from home, because we're not, you know, serving in a store or in a McDonald's. But even shift work, if you give flexibility, and you can use technology to do this, you get more engagement and you find it easier to attract talent. And if you have better management and leadership, you find it much easier to retain that talent. And better also means more diverse, because if people do not see people who look like themselves above them, they will leave. And that's why, you know, we keep perennially filling the bottom quartile, but unless the second and third and fourth quartile get more diverse, we're never going to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. And that's why management really does matter.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I was doing earlier in the week, and I've done it for 6 or 7 years as being a judge for the Institute of Customer Service Awards. Mm-hmm. And Joe used to be at the CMI way back in the day, and that's always interesting. This year there was big companies, and they're only going to be announced in March at the Hilton on Park Lane. But you kind of read through them, and there's a challenge. I think also maybe Sandra has an opinion on this. It's hard to build a good reputation, but you know when you don't like something. Yeah, yes. You know that I won't go to a Weatherspoons. I don't like Weatherspoons. I don't like the philosophy. I don't like the guy. I will never set foot in a Weatherspoons ever, right? So I know that kind of thing. I know what brands I won't buy. It's not rational in all cases, but I just don't want to buy Tommy Hilfiger. I won't wear it, right? It's no. So I don't know why, but so there's this interesting thing about the repelling kind of reputation as well as a welcoming reputation. And surely also the treatment of staff have a lot to do with that.
Huge. You know, Paul Pullman at Unilever, who is a great proponent of, he has this thing, net positive, which is not only should businesses, you know, have purpose at their core and give back in a productive way that builds their brands. And they did find at Unilever that brands that adopted a purpose outgrew brands that didn't, and whether that was Dove or Lifebuoy soap, right? And Lifebuoy soap purpose, just because you might think, oh God, soap purpose. But it was about, they realized that every child that washed their hands and everybody that washed their hands in third world countries, they saved the lives of 5 children. So that became the purpose of Lifebuoy soap, and they sold a lot more Lifebuoy soap that way, right? So it is, it's contextual, but he found that when he adopted that sustainable living and purpose-driven and inclusive leadership, that he went from 12th position on LinkedIn with graduates to number 1. And suddenly he was drowning in talent. Everybody wanted to work at Unilever. So it absolutely matters, particularly for younger generations. And there are going to be sectors, and I know I have people, good friends in the legal sector, they're paying a fortune, but they still find it super hard to attract the talent, because, especially diverse talent, because it's just like, well, no, it's not the money. It's not going to do it for me. I want a life. I want values. I want purpose. I want to like where I work. And I think that that's the way it's going to stay.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me because there's always that dilemma between I'm young and I have my ideals, and oh my God, I have a mortgage and the interest rate on the mortgage just went up from 1 to 6.25. Do I have to bite my tongue and, bow down to the man, as it were, or can I keep things up?
Yeah, it's and people, I think, are very perplexed, and I've heard a lot of senior leaders and managers muddle over this, that, even when they're faced with inflation, they're still quitting if they don't like the company and its values. And it's become much easier and much more common for younger people to have something on the side hustle. Technology makes that easier, but they're more willing to do it. And the other thing, was asked, the last session talked about, should CEOs speak out? And I just thought this was quite interesting. Earlier this week, I had the fortune to interview John Pepper. I'm ex-P&G. And he, of course, retired a while ago. He's in his 80s, still very sharp. He was chair of Disney for 5 years. And so I asked him about Disney. Yeah,
we're all fascinated with Bob Iger and the politics.
And he was very clear. He didn't hesitate at all. He said, that was a mistake. We should have signed the letter. We should have spoken out. We should have been clear. Our employees demanded it. We should have listened to them. And that was his point of view, right? And his point of view is, as CEOs, and I think this is Paul Pullman's point of view, you do have to speak out on these issues. You do have to do the right thing, because if you don't, you will get caught out. Whether it's your corporate brand will definitely suffer. I agree with the statement earlier that you can't dissect this thing, one brand for the product, one brand for the employee, one brand for the investors. People they'll smell that.
I mean, so I think you have to choose sides often. You can't please everybody. And as a historian, you look at revolutions, yeah? To try and be a liberal, rational person in the Russian Revolution, in the French Revolution, in Germany in the 1930s, what did you accomplish? Both sides hated you because you were trying to sit on the fence. So you're better off being way out there with some sort of crazy Marxists. At least only half the people hate you then. So you have a better chance of survival. And I think, I wouldn't want to be in the States now as a business person. It's a country tearing itself apart, it seems to me.
Yeah, but beware of the say-do gap. So what really is the worst of all worlds is you take a side, we saw this with Black Lives Matter, quite frankly. So many people and companies and CEOs taking sides, publishing positions, tweeting stuff, and then doing nothing. And that is the worst of all worlds, because that's what people see through. And they start to use technology to do it. In this country, the gender pay gap, when it was released, somebody did a Twitter bot that every time a CEO tweeted about, gender progress is important, that bot went to the data set, found their actual gender pay gap, and tweeted that. And of course, say-do gap, right? All these CEOs saying women are so important to us. Oh, we have a 50% gender pay gap, you know.
Yeah.
So it's
But the companies in the States that are willing to support women traveling for abortions, that's like not a say-do gap, that's real.
That is real.
But that's dangerous also on the one hand, because there's nutcases out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, you can say, and this is the political analyst like John King on CNN will back this up. You know, the midterms did surprise people, but they shouldn't have that much, because abortion played a much bigger role in those results than the pollsters predicted.
Yeah, yeah. So it's all very interesting. Anything else looking ahead that you're seeing on the horizon that is worth discussing here from a perspective of reputation, brand, or life in general?
Just greater agility, right? So I think this is what we've seen is, you know, the rise of employee voice, being more flexible, being more agile. That's how you're going to cope with uncertainty on the one hand, but on the other hand, you have to anchor it even more in your values and in better management and leadership. You have to make sure that not just you as a CEO and not just your C-suite, but your middle managers, you know, the ones leading your frontline people, your senior managers are doing a good job. It is absolutely the case that the biggest correlation between performance, engagement, and happiness and satisfaction at work is the relationship with the line manager. There's lots of research on that, and I just this week saw some more. So it matters more than ever, and that is also, the modern manager is much more agile. They do things on principle and on values, not on rule books.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because I was going to say, at universities we tie ourselves into terrible knots. Part of that is because of a level of bureaucracy within the university that just seems to be bloat. Anyone who's read Graeber, who died's book on bullshit jobs, you know, there are lots of them in higher education, there are lots of them in government, and the way they were identified is by asking people whether their job, if it disappeared, would do any harm to the organization. Graeber was at the LSE, and something like 40% of white-collar jobs say, you don't need me. And this came out before the pandemic, where you go, we need the nurses, we need the garbage truck people, we don't need paper pushers in universities, but that's neither here nor there. And the second dilemma is the way we interpret regulation over-regulates. It's this weird thing. I don't want to be a regulator's actor-outer, but the people we have in registry and GDPR and all of these functions around the university are such scaredy cats that they tell you can't do anything, you know?
Well, if you lead anything like ESG or any of this reputation with a compliance mindset, which is what you're talking about, you're doomed to fail, because it isn't about compliance. It's about innovation, growth, and efficiency. It's actually about better performance. And looking at Sandra's charts, and I wasn't surprised to see this, but I did think, you know, it showed that the diversity agenda is less important for a lot of people. But don't people see the correlation between that and attracting and retaining talent and getting innovation? I mean, that was to me like, oh, well, that's a bit of a miss, because it's absolutely essential. And, you know, the world is getting more diverse too, right? So if you want the talent, you're going to have to actually do a better job.
Or you want to understand your customer base.
Yes. Well, yeah, and that means the customer base is more diverse, the employee base is more diverse. And so you have to be more diverse if you're going to continue to build your brand reputation. Yeah. And that will drive the things that people really did care about, that were in that top quartile and the upper half of the chart.
Yeah, all very interesting. Keeping an eye on time, we have been talking for about half an hour. It's always nice to actually involve people, so I don't know if anyone has any comments to chip in with or questions. Oh, that's very good. Do we all think the world is going to end? No? Think everything will be sorted out? No?
Thank you. That was a really interesting discussion. My name's Kate Levine, and I work for myself as a consultant in corporate communications and brand activism. Anne, Anne, you talked a couple of times about, you mentioned flexibility, you also talked about the gender pay gap, and you talked about being able to engage sections of the community that maybe have decided they don't want to work anymore, or they don't want to work in the same way that you used to. And you also talked about misguided corporations perhaps thinking that we're fine with women, we've got plenty of them, but as you said, you bet in 3 years' time they'll go. So I wanted to come back to flexibility. There obviously isn't enough flexibility in the workforce, and I definitely think that underrepresented groups are more likely to remain in the workforce if there is. Do we need more regulation around flexibility? If corporations aren't doing it, and they're not quickly enough seeing the benefit of introducing flexibility, do we need something else?
Well, it's a great question. There was in the Employee Rights Bill a clause that said the default is flexible working, but it got struck, like a lot of things. And, you know, I think that, so I do think that there could be a greater regulatory framework that would encourage it. I think what's important to me is two things. One, I really think that government should get much more on the front foot with data collection. I think the gender pay gap monitoring was a good thing. You know, I could not for the life of me understand why it wasn't extended to ethnicity, disability, other things that really matter, because it forces transparency and measurement, and it makes people aware of where they stand, and, you know, what gets measured gets managed, that old adage. So I think that's very disappointing. I also think that there should be consequences for inaction. So transparency with teeth. So if you aren't if you aren't publishing, and we now know in ESG it is part of the framework that you have to have this stuff, but if you don't have action plans and you don't make any progress, there should be consequences. You know, fines, for example, right? Because that would, encourage more people to act. But the last thing, and this is, we can't forget that 99%, I know many of you will be in big businesses, but 99% of the businesses in this country are small. So we really also have to emphasize that if you want to attract and retain talent, get more innovation and grow, you need to pay attention to these things. And I think that there's also a government messaging missing. That's missing. And I think somebody said to it before, I think it was you, Kai, it all gets branded woke and it's all negative. It's not woke. It's actually good business sense. And that's what we need to keep articulating. And because people forget that.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Tim Lefroy. I was an apprentice, but that was over 50 years ago. And I wanted to observe two things about your piece. First of all, to thank you, because this has been, for me, this whole wonderful session with ECHO has been a bit of a game of two halves, in the sense that earlier on, Sir Michael Rake gave us a picture which didn't leave much cause for optimism. And you've come on now and you've given us this wonderful, energetic session and very upbeat piece, and some philosophies, particularly from Anne, that I completely agree with, and some from you, Kai, which I kind of recognize and understand about the way the bureaucracy and the things surrounding your world in universities. And so I'd almost like to capture this energy and upbeat bit of this session, asking you question that if you just like to pick, it almost doesn't matter which shade of government we get from 2024 going on, but what your 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would give and programs that you don't currently see, maybe in relation to the NHS, which seems to be in a big problem at the moment, how you would take some of these ideas that you've talked about, agility, adaptiveness, etc., and translate them to government first and maybe NHS after that.
That's a small question, isn't it? So there's a couple of things. We have said that really 3 things. One, we need to give companies incentives to invest in developing their people. And I'm not just talking about an apprenticeship levy. I'm talking about something far more systematic. We give all these write-offs for R&D investment. We give all these write-offs for, all kinds of infrastructure investment. What about people investment? That's also a longer-term capital project, isn't it? It's not just buying kit, and it's training people. That takes time. So we would love to see that. Incentives, because British business, and I know that many of you are global, but they spend half of what Europe spends, for example, on developing their talent. It's not anywhere near enough. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, I really think we need to get the data, across all of these characteristics, make it mandatory to measure it. Most companies have it. It's not that difficult to get, and the more that we get better at asking for it, the better that we get at. And 80% of the CMI folks said, yes, of course we want an ethnicity pay gap. They agreed. The CEOs in the FTSE agreed. So that's just obvious, and I would extend it beyond to the other characteristics that we've talked about. And then the last thing, actually, this is quite an interesting one, and the US does this, which I thought, that's quite interesting. So you can't get federal money unless you have a diversity and inclusion policy and you put it into practice. So what if you couldn't get any government contracts unless you had, some of these things and action plans and you were making progress? Because let's face it, the government is a huge customer, biggest customer of consulting, et cetera. So that would stimulate a lot of action. In terms of the NHS, I just think that so much of their issue is around collaboration and better leadership and management. And a little story, one of the NHS trusts was rated needs improvement. And so what they did is they, for the first time ever, put their entire management on the same course. It was, it's a plug for CMI, it was a chartered manager degree apprenticeship. But you had the chief clinician, the head nurse, the night porter, the lab guy, and all sorts of mixed people. And you put them through the same course with the same objective. How do we improve patient outcomes so we can get our CQC rating up? Now, this was not a quick fix. It took 3 or 4 years. But it was the first time they'd all worked together to solve a common problem, right? Instead of in their silos. So they all did the course. They all graduated. It was Henley. Sorry, Kai. And that hospital went from needs improvement to outstanding because they all collaborated together and delivered better management and leadership outcomes.
On Addenbrooke's, where they decided that what they needed to do was get patients out of the hospital. And at some point you ask yourself, you're reading this article in the FT, article this big, you're like, does no one manage in the NHS? Because it was shocking, right? And then comments after were, doesn't sound that difficult to me. The doctor doesn't come around to check you out. So you're lying there on Friday, doctor doesn't come, you're lying there on Saturday, you're lying there on Sunday, doctor rocks up on Monday, you've just blocked a bed for 3 days for no reason whatsoever. I've checked myself out of hospitals because I just had enough, right? Oh, you might die. Oh, I'm gonna die if I lie around here any longer.
Yeah, it's a complex problem, but better management and leadership, not necessarily just throw money at it. I'm sorry that you checked yourself out. But again, that's a silo, part of that, and it is known. It's the care silo. The care homes, there's no beds in the care homes, so they can't move the people out of the hospital into the care homes, right? So it's about looking more systematically and collaborating more systematically to fix these ecosystem problems. And it's the same with leveling up. Devolution, right? There's a reason I believe that Germany and the US are more productive. They're federalist. The states and the communities have far more say in how they spend the money, how they develop the infrastructure, how they develop the labor force, how they work together to create ecosystems, whether it's Silicon Valley or Charlotte or Pittsburgh. Those are all great examples. And I think here, to level up, you can't do it if it's all centralized.
Yeah. And surely the care system is not separate from the healthcare system.
No, it's not.
if you turn your thinking cap on.
Yes.
Yeah, but it is, so, yeah, all very funny. I mean, the thing that gets up my nose right now is this, that came out last week, that all students were now migrants. You know, first of all, they counted when there weren't any because everyone was under lockdown. So it's gone from 50,000 to 500,000 students. The 2021 goal was 500,000 students or whatever it was. You don't want their money. You don't want to keep them. It costs us £150,000
can I help you here?
to subsidize a doctor, and then you're going to kick them out again?
I can help you. Education in this country is a bigger export than financial services.
Yeah.
So why the hell would you shoot yourselves in the foot by capping it? It's one of the great British contributions to the global economy.
Yeah,
right?
The 9,250 that the British students pay via the loan scheme is worth 6,500 now. From when it was introduced to now it is. And you can argue what it costs to educate a student. Most universities say about 9. But anyone who's done activity-based costing knows that that's, you know, a very, very difficult area to be certain about. But the universities would all go to hell in a handcart without international students,
Yeah.
both from finances but also intellectually. And we've already cut ourselves off from EU funding. There are no EU students
It's a
kicking
huge,
around.
it's an export,
really a tragedy.
not just of financial merit, but it's that soft
power.
power. It's all, they go back, they have British values, they believe in the British system. You know, it's very, very important. And, you know, again, what does the U.S. do? They take that out of the immigration number. And I can't believe that this country, because it's such a big export, wouldn't do the same. So that would be the other government policy.
Do you want to be in the government?
No. Well, that's part of the issue, isn't it? Yeah. Government is very badly managed. Oops. Well, it's true.
Last question. Charles.
Charles Tilley, IRCC. You mentioned you would never go into Wetherspoons. There are companies such as Ryanair, you know, who are focused on two things: safety and the lowest cost operator possible, and on that basis they can then attract customers. You also have situations where, you know, they do a survey and say, do you like free-range chicken? Absolutely. And then, you know, will you buy free-range chicken when you can find out that it's actually 4 times more expensive than, you know, very badly brought-up chicken? How do you reconcile what you've been talking about with customer behaviour and companies which are focused on you know, making profit at all costs and are actually successful over the long term?
That's such a difficult space to wander into. I think about that, Charles, all the time from, you know, sage advice on how to save money in the cost of living crisis. I mean, I go to Aldi's and Lidl's, I shop at my ethnic stores, but I will eat proper chicken because otherwise I won't eat it. But if it's coming from, you know, some fat old white-haired white man giving sage advice to the poor of the country on how to cook, I'm not going anywhere near that. That'll just end in tears for me. Will I buy something?
That's a very personal view.
Well,
Will I go to Ryanair? I fly Ryanair all the time to my house in Spain, right? Which also has a certain irony. I'm going to spend a fiver
one
to,
of the things
to get
that
to a big house in
Ryanair
Spain.
did right, and it's back to this employee thing, they kept their employees, and they did not get caught out in the employee shortage. Mm-hmm. So they could actually fly the planes, right, and move the bags. And now that's why they're making $1 billion in profit, and EasyJet is, you know, is well below them now. So I think there's more than just, you know, he wanted to make money. He was sensible enough not to fire everybody.
Do they reconcile with all the values you've just been talking about? That's my question.
No, but I think that what they did do right was just recognize that they can't just lay off massively. And I don't know, I wonder if, I was very scared at that stat that 68% of pilots don't know how to fly the plane. I don't know, I hope that the Ryanair pilots know how to fly the plane. Don't know, they tend to be younger.
But you get that nice little jingle when you land on time.
Big questions, big topics. Just a really, really interesting day. I must thank all of you for joining us today, for our wonderful speakers. And ending on, we did want to end on a high. We did want to end on, these are some genuine, practical things we can all think about, and it all starts with us. Yeah, it all starts with us in various ways when we talk about purpose, values, culture, people. The things that we can all help, either in terms of how we lead our own organizations or how we support those we're guiding and advising. So really, I hope there's been something for everyone today. I know we've touched on a lot of subjects in a lot of different areas, but I hope you've all found it really useful. And again, from our perspective and from all at ECHO, just delighted to have you with us, delighted to share these perspectives with you, and really, again, to just underscore all these things, all the issues around change and transformation and taking people with you. We firmly believe in really sound, rigorous insight, foresight, and support, so that you do really take everyone across the whole organization through this journey of change, aiming for better. So thank you, and please, I hope you can join us for drinks and continue discussions with the wonderful Anne and Kai and all our other speakers. And the only thing I will finish on is we've talked a lot about actions rather than just words, and avoiding the say-do gap. And I was privileged to join Anne at your 75th anniversary dinner last week. And I have never been to a more diverse, energizing, inspirational evening ever in my life. And Anne, that's down to your leadership and what you do at the CMI. It is truly outstanding. And those of you who don't know about the CMI, please look into it. I have some great, great things come from the organization. So thank you. Thank you all.